Between East and West, rethinking the Silk Roads. When people hear East and West, they picture two separate worlds. But for nearly 2000 years, a web of caravan trails and sea lanes, what we call the Silk Roads, wove those worlds together. In the next 10 minutes, I'll challenge three myths. That one neat highway linked China and Rome, that the route died when the Europeans turned to the sea, and the third one, that the very label of Silk Road is neutral historically. So, if you're ready, let us begin. In 1977, the German geographer Ferdinand von Richthofen coined the term Seidenstraße. He drew two red and blue axes running from ancient Xishan around the Taklamakan Desert through Samarkand and straight on to the Mediterranean. But archaeologists have never found a paved Roman-style road crossing Asia like the Appian Way. Instead, they uncover a patchwork of drifting tracks. Travelers hired local guides, shifted paths when deserts moved or ruler changed, and almost never rode from China to Rome. Goods moved segment by segment, so did ideas, religions, plant, horses, even slaves. The road was really many roads, pulsing to the rhythm of empires, market prices, and climate. Fast forward to the 13th century. Genghis Khan heirs knit together the largest land empire in history, stretching from Iraq to Korea. Under this Pax Mongolica, camel caravans could travel from Persia to China under one single authority and security. Four Khanates, Yuan China, Ilkhan Persia, the Golden Horde on the Russian steppes, and the Chagatai realm in Central Asia, shared roads and taxation. The result? A surge in long-distance trade. So Persian merchants brought silk, spices, and jade westward. In return, horses, silver, and glass flowed east. Technology traveled too, as we will see, reshaping the European world. But all good stories have to come to an end. So, climate stress and plague weakened the great land empires, but another revolution was already under sail. In the mid 14th century, Portuguese captains, armed with gunpowder cannon, perfected from Mongol models, learned to ride the monsoon winds of the Indian Ocean. Their caravels stitched together a new all-sea corridor: Lisbon, Cape of Good Hope, Calicut, Malacca, Macao. Within decades, Spanish gallants were crossing the Pacific from Acapulco to Manila, pouring American silver into Asian ports. Sea routes offered three big advantages over caravans. First, the bulk capacity. One hull carried more cargo than 1,000 camels. 2. Continuous control. European crews sailed the whole distance, round trip, instead of handing goods from one middleman to another. Third one, floating firepower. Shipborne cannon let small kingdoms punch far above their weight, impose customs, dues, and seize coastal cities. So, in the 5th century, overland caravans began to decline and naval trade began to rise. Along the Silk Roads traveled what historians call biomoral goods, things believed to transform body and spirit: saffron that healed, pepper that preserved, silk that signaled virtue and status. By the 16th 1500s, Spanish silver mined in the New World sailed to Manila, then caravanned inland to Beijing to pay for silk and porcelain. China became the world's ultimate silver sink, proof that Asia still set the terms of luxury commerce. Disease also hitched a ride. Early plagues had circled Eurasia between the 6th and the 8th centuries, and the population hadn't had the time to build some resistance. The 14th century wave was different. Steppe warfare disrupted local quarantine customs, allowing fleas to leap from marmots to men, then into caravan hubs. Within 6 years, the pathogen galloped from China to Poland. The pandemic rebalanced power, fewer taxpayers, fewer troops, and a sudden premium on labor in Europe that would later fuel innovation. Concerning technological traffic, it was a two-way round trip. Paper spread west in the 8th century after Chinese craftsmen were captured at Talas. The magnetic compass appeared in Chinese texts in the 11th century and in the Italian manual barely a century later. Would that be diffusion or double invention? Historians still debate. Gunpowder left Song China as simple firepots, but Mongol engineers, plus Russian metallurgy and Persian ballistics, turned it into the first cast iron cannon. Europeans then mounted cannons on ships, as we talk about, the hardware of what we now call the military revolution. And talking about the points of Marco Polo bringing pastas to Italy from China, this idea is romantic but wrong, for noodles and pastas are made from different technologies and techniques, so there are no corroboration. The Silk Roads also shaped European fantasies. In 1253, St. Louis sent the friar William of Rybrook to Mongolia, hoping for an anti-Muslim alliance. Kubilai Khan later dispatched to the Chinese monk Rabban Bar Soma all the way to Paris and Rome. And of course, there is Marco Polo, whose tales of Kubilai's court ignited Europe's China's dream. Centuries later, as Britain and Russia dueled for Central Asia in the Great Game, explorer spies like Sven Hedin and Orestein dug up desert cities and shipped manuscripts to London, Paris, and St. Petersburg. Their books made the Silk Road a household phrase and justifies fresh imperial ambitions. Historians warn of three pitfalls in the label Silk Road. First, it shrinks many networks into one dramatic ribbon, erasing local routes around the Himalayas or across Southeast Asia. Secondly, it privileges caravans and ignores maritime circuits that, after the 15th century, carried bulk cargo and underwrote an early capitalism. Thirdly, it freezes time, starting with Rome and the Han, ending with Vasco da Gama, when in fact, caravan trade persisted under the Ottomans, Safavids, Mughals, Qing, and Romanovs. Remember, Richthofen coined Silk Road while surveying Chinese coal fields for a proposed Berlin to Shandong railway, a scheme to bypass British sea power. The term gave his project a prestigious past and paved the way for European stakes in Asia. By 1938, the Swedish explorer Hedin's bestseller, The Silk Road, canonized the myth. Today, China's Belt and Road Initiatives revives the name once more, proving how a 19th century construct still fuels a 21st century geopolitics. So, were the Silk Roads a single Roman Chinese highway? No. Did they vanish in the 16th century? Also no. And is the phrase itself neutral? Definitively not. The real lesson is richer. For 2 millennia, East and West were entangled in continuous exchange of silk and silver, gunpowder and germs, hopes and fears, rise and falls.